Yuta Okkotsu was always a cursed character, destined to become a monster because, as they say, the road to hell is paved with the greatest intentions, and Yuta walks that path following in Gojo's footsteps. Yuta's like the standard tragic OP shonen protagonist, turned into the lovable side character with an inherent darkness that contrasts his blinding humanity. And it's pretty crazy because Yuta's development and story is one that's pretty easy to gloss over, and even before making this video, even I didn't have the best understanding of his character and motivations. All I saw him as was a really cool side character, one of the 4 special great top tiers, with immense power and really cool abilities, with the capabilities to handle the JJK world in Gojo's passing. He chose to carry that burden, inherit the will of his teacher, and become a monster. As our initial lens into the JJK world, Yuta begins his journey in the darkest place that a person can be. His childhood love died when he was 8, and he's been dealing with her spirit haunting him ever since that tragic moment. And just from the context of this dismal backstory, we can learn a bit more about Yuta's psychology. He's isolated, he's alone, he's been blaming himself for an event that he can't change. And to make it even worse, he has an estranged relationship with his family. So all Yuta really has is himself and his demons, which isn't really great company. And to top off the cherry of depression on the Sunday of sadness, Yuta's also constantly bullied, so he's pretty much in the worst possible headspace that you can imagine. And what's pretty crazy is that the Jujutsu world pretty much ignored the entire Rika incident for like 6 years. They basically neglected Yuta's entire situation despite the constant red flags, and that's because at the beginning, there wasn't that much trouble, disregarding the effect that this situation had on Yuta's family. But before the locker incident at the beginning of Volume 0, because like I said before, Yuta was a constant victim of bullying, there was another major incident that ended up being the decisive factor in igniting the investigation on Yuta. The result of that investigation was that several Jujutsu sorcerers went after Yuta, but they were all beaten by him, which inevitably leads to Gojo's intervention, and the rest is history. Now, we don't know many of these major details. What was the situation that initiated this investigation? How did all these Jujutsu sorcerers get folded by Yuta? But even without the context, I think we can all guess the right answer. It's because of Rika and her desire to protect Yuta by hurting others right in front of his eyes. Yuta's not an aggressive person. He's pretty passive and doesn't like violence. So having Rika as this entity that protects him while others suffer in the process manifested this rift between him and the rest of humanity. He had invisible walls surrounding him just like Gojo's infinity. Rika's existence caused Yuta to separate himself from his family and anyone else that got close to him. He has no one else he can turn to for comfort. No one who truly understands him. He's attempted to unalive himself on multiple occasions, but Rika stops him every time. He wants nothing more than to end his wretched existence, but he can't. But when he goes to Jujutsu Tech, everything changes. Yuta gains friends, something he's never had before. He has a teacher who cares about him. For the first time in a long time, there's people surrounding Yuta that actually understand him. He isn't lonely anymore. He doesn't have to be isolated. And through these people and the experiences that he goes through, he gains the will and the confidence to live. This notion of protection, this idea to overcome his burdens and adapt to his overpowered abilities. He wants to become a person who wants to save people who need to be saved, so no one has to go through the same suffering that he has. And by letting go of the pain from Rika, he's capable of moving forward. But see, the point of showcasing all these aspects of Yuta in respect to the development he undergoes is to contrast the darkness of Jujutsu society, to highlight his humanity in a clearly inhumane line of work. Jujutsu sorcerers are one thing and one thing only. They're monsters, and it's only the strongest of these demons that will end up surviving. Why is it that Nanami died, or someone as pure-hearted as Haibara? All the good ones pass away, while the let's say morally questionable ones end up living another day. Meimei 445 is the perfect example of the injustice in Jujutsu society. All she cared about was herself, money, and her other disturbed activities, even willing to sacrifice her brother to do what's necessary. With the unfairness of this twisted system best showcased during Shibuya, she actually goes and vacates to Malaysia, the one place Nanami never got to visit, though it was his dream. But Yuta is different because even though he retains these human aspects, he's still able to rise up to the occasion and sacrifice himself for the greater good. But the difference between him and Meimei is while Meimei makes selfish choices that purely benefit herself, Yuta's actions are pretty selfless, despite if they're cold and calculated decisions. Which means there's not only kindness but cruelty in the way that he operates. because it just means that no matter how good that Yuta is, he will throw it all away if it means that he can protect the people he loves, save them, and live to see the next day. It's part of the task. It's part of the job. This is the transition in Yuta's character from Volume 0 to the Culling Games, and a lot of people miss it because we're always so focused on Yuji and his development. But Yuta changed massively from the optimistic person we see by the end of Volume 0 to the stoic and cold badass we are reintroduced to at the end of Shibuya. And to be honest, that persona of Yuta is just a facade. A mask behind a mask. He's not as composed as he lets you want to believe. He's actually stressed and anxious as it can be. That lingering confidence that he was able to awaken to is now all shaken up. When Yuji woke up after Yuta killed and revived him, he was smiling, with tears streaming down his face, implying that even though he spearheaded this master plan, he wasn't assured that he could follow through. He was apprehensive about his abilities up until Yuji woke up. And when you contrast his disposition when he was in Africa with Miguel, Yuta was far more laid back, joking around with Gojo, which surprised him, showing that he has grown and become more tempered after moving on from his past. But after Shibuya, this side of Yuta is pretty much gone. He became cold, stoic, with dark circles surrounding his eyes, clear indications that his burdens and stresses are severely affecting his mentality. Being a sorcerer isn't a job that he actively enjoys. Hell, I don't know who likes it. Maybe Mei because she's constantly chasing a bag. But the fact of the matter is, it's a cruel world and only the fittest survive, and Yuta is capable of making these tough decisions. But thematically, we can even take Rika, the Queen of Curses, as the parallel of the before and after of Yuta from Volume 0 to now. Rika is like the precursor and the reality of Yuta as a monster, where before it was an external part of himself and now he's accepted it as internally ingrained with his responsibilities. The fact that his technique is copy is because it symbolizes that emulation of inhumanity as he becomes stronger, which is the ultimate sacrifice by adopting his environment, as these are the things that only Yuta can do. You see, it was foreshadowed from very early on that Yuta would have to walk down this path. For example, in Sendai Colony, where Yuta declares that he would be the one to take down Kenjaku because he doesn't want Gojo to kill his best friend twice. Now, this was something later he actually did, but the point is, Yuta was always the one shoving the suffering onto his plate, and even though it was a hard pill to swallow, he still did it. He also intended to accumulate all 400 points on his own in the Culling Games, wanting to isolate himself as the only one responsible because he felt desperately guilty about being absent in Shibuya, which ultimately resulted in his closest friends being destroyed, mutilated, and even worse. This anxiety is further emphasized during Gojo vs Sukuna, where he is visibly the most stressed and concerned of Gojo's well-being, next to Itadori, while everyone else watches with bated breath. There's even a point where Yuta wanted to jump in to help Gojo out, only to be stopped because he was reminded that he would just be a burden to Gojo, and that crushed Yuta because he knew that he wasn't enough. And continuing forward, he further blames himself for choosing to kill Kenjaku, as opposed to helping Hikarume and Yuji deal with Sukuna. Now it's clear that Yuta is holding on to a lot, but a big question is, why does he act this way? And how did he become so volatile? Well, in contrast to what we think we know about Yuta, his character arc never finished, and despite the fact that it seems he's grown up and matured since Volume 0, the truth is, he hasn't truly gotten over his traumatic experiences. Since the death of Rika, Yuta was alone. No friends, no family, no purpose. But Maki instilled this message to have confidence to live for others, and use the power he was blessed with to protect. And so he did just that, but he never got over his negative self-image. He cares little for himself and only sees himself as useful if he's working towards the greater good. This is why in the aftermath of the Sendai battle, Yuro told Yuta that he would never surpass Sukuna with such a weak mentality, where Yuta is compelled to do everything for others while Sukuna only lives for himself. It was all set up for this final battle with Sukuna, where he would have to sink down to accept his mindset. In order to slay and overcome the greatest monsters, you have to become a monster yourself. And that's why, thematically speaking, Yuta is easily one of the most important characters in the story along with Yuji. Because just as Yuji is the closest one to Sukuna, Yuta was always the closest one to Gojo, with the underscoring point defining Yuta's character is the fact that he was constantly seeing things from Gojo's perspective. As one of 4 special great sorcerers in the entire story, Yuta can physically only relate to a handful of people. Yuki was powerful, but she was never present. Geto was killed and his body was hijacked by a total freak. So he witnessed the burden of Gojo, a burden of isolation, loneliness, and inhumanity. The reason why he's constantly stressed, stoic, and constantly blaming himself for everything is because Gojo did as well. but he always played it off with a goofy smile. This is why the Shibuya incident is such an important focal point in this transition, because Gojo has this metaphorical safety net, and the person everyone relied on in Jujutsu Kaisen was eliminated, because everyone relied on him too much. It's pure suffering for the strongest to stand at the top and hold the foundation as a single pillar, and when Yuta returns from Africa, that's when he truly understands the position that Gojo was in. That's why in chapter 261, when Yuta acts on his decision to literally inherit Gojo's will, it's groundbreaking development for his character, while also speaking out to the larger problems in JJK. It was his destiny to assume this role, and every event that transpired was just building up to that moment. When Yuta chose to be the one to kill Kenjaku, his resolve was firm, and after the deed was carried out, his future was basically set in stone. Because I think deep down, despite what they did, they wouldn't be enough to eliminate Sukuna, and neither would Gojo, so for him, the last resort was simply an inevitability. He just had to stand by and wait. And if no one was gonna step up to the plate, if he aimed to carry that burden, he would take it as far as he can, even if he sacrifices himself in the process. And Yuta was frustrated because everyone was concerned for his sake, but there was none of that for Gojo. To them, it didn't matter if Gojo suffered. And Gojo was always taking on those challenges, doing anything to fulfill his role for the sake of victory. And Yuta, accepting his responsibility, is compelled to live and die by that mindset. But like I said, it's so significant because Yuta is fundamentally the most human sorcerer in Jujutsu Kaisen, fated to make the most inhumane decisions. Gojo's footsteps are scattered across this domain, and he did it all on his own. He even took the burden to annihilate all the higher-ups. Sure, that was something he always wanted to do, but it's not like he isn't losing something in the process. He's losing himself. But it's a dynamic moment because Yuta stands his ground. He tells Gojo that he's staying and that he shouldn't have to live this nightmare on his own. He shouldn't be the only one to inherit the burden of Monster. Because we know the end result, the final chapter in that story. It's bookmarked on Ryomen Sukuna, the pinnacle of sorcery, and the single most cursed being in Jujutsu Kaisen. If they are to win, if things are to change, all sorcerers have to sacrifice parts of themselves as a united front, not just the strongest. And this is the underlying message of the Shinjuku Showdown. Everyone steps up to Gojo's position, some more than others, and many who don't make it and die along the way. But that's the nature of the cursed Jujutsu world, and as possibly the next honored one, it's Yuta who will see it through to the end. And now of course he's also got Yuji, who's a demon in his own right. It's part of the reason why he's made it this far. But from start to finish, and the middle point as well, Yuta Okkotsu was cursed to become the most human monster in Jujutsu Kaisen.